subjective interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Oh, I thought of a fear, though I don't know if it's my fear. Well, maybe it's my fear about overall fear,
Mm-hmm.
which is that I fear that we're not going to, and maybe this happens, maybe it doesn't happen, but I fear that we're not going to come to the, like, a deep lived realization of how important the natural world is and how we are a part of it and we are it. We won't have it soon enough that we'll realize it after we've extincted half the species and degraded all the ecosystems, and we'll just live in the consequences of that for millions of years. So that's a little bit of a fear.
Mm. Have you always been so interested and passionate about, the world around us since you were a kid?
I don't know if I would phrase it like that. Like, I'm very interested in the world. I was like interested in how the universe works and spend a bunch of time learning and figuring out how it works and reading about other things that people had figured out about how it works. I think like so I have like determination and curiosity around those things. Like I don't know if I would use the word passion, like at least not in that sense. Like it's almost like what I have now is more of a response to tragedy and grief. And when you mix it with determination and curiosity, then it sounds a little bit different than passion to me.
Mm-hmm.
Passion feels like kind of light, and this is good, but it's not light.
It's not what you feel, basically. And I'm
I think
asking
there's something
because
about. Oh, go ahead.
no, you go ahead, sorry.
There's something about the word passion, at least the way that we use it colloquially, where it's like, or the connotation of it is like, oh, they just have this passion for it, and it like lights them up, and it's so exciting. And but I mean, if you woke up in the morning and considered that, you know, major species will be gone in a few years, that nearly all the coral reefs on Earth will be gone in 30 years, which is 25% of all the species on Earth live on the coral reef. I mean, in the oceans live on the coral reef. And it's like, is that passion to go try to do something about that? It doesn't have that type of lightness. It's not like, oh, I just have this fire and I love coral so much, this is why I do this. No, I think it's like grief and determination, and it's different. It's
Mm-hmm.
like,
It's like a
it's
deep care.
steady. Sure, there's definitely a good amount of care in there as well. Yeah, so it doesn't have the kind of lightness and fieriness of passion.
Mm-hmm. And I'm asking because you were telling me off camera what you're doing right now with coral reefs and basically your work with the environment, and I'm just trying to connect the dots because what we most of us know from you, it's kind of like your path as an inventor, and then with Google X, and then rapid prototyping, and then I know that you also had some like odd jobs like musicians and bands you just mentioned. So I'm just trying to connect the dots as to how that came about, because if you're doing this at this stage in life, it's because you've realized in a sense that that's kind of like what you want to do, like after all this, that's what you want to focus on.
Yeah. Oh, you want me to go answer a question? Let me see.
Mm.
Um, I don't know. I think like there's a desire to characterize a person by vocation or some sort of esteemable attribute. And that's not that important to me. Not that I'm like better than anybody, just like, yeah. I mean, I just don't think about the same way. Like I've been to a bunch of events and certainly Mind Valley events, and they definitely introduce people by like, here's their two big accomplishments, their three big accomplishments. And that's what I mean by like understanding people through their esteemable attributes. And it's like, it doesn't strike me as anything in particular. Like, a person is something that's very different than their esteemable attributes. Their esteemable attributes are things that, you know, society is agreed right now are worth paying attention to. But a lot of times those things are non-meaningful, or they're actively distorting. So like we'll listen to people because they made a lot of money. And it's like, okay, well there's amazing, you know, good-hearted people that have made a lot of money, and there's terrible people that have made a lot of money. There's people that have made a lot of money at one thing and then say stupid things about a different subject. We pay attention to all of it. And what that tells me is really the flaw in the esteemable attribute. It doesn't tell me that much about the person. So I'm not trying to make some complicated answer to your thing, but I've always worked on a lot of things, actually. Like even while I was working on things like Google Glass or the self-driving car, I was doing work with entrepreneurs all around the developing world. You know, getting solar to people that are living on $1 or $2 a day, or essential micronutrients so people don't die of anemia during childbirth, and just on and on, hundreds of teams. So it doesn't fit that well in an intro. You can't just pop in there and say, oh, and then there's the time when he's working with these farmers in Cameroon, and then there was the time when, you know, it just doesn't fit. But like for me, it's no special change. There is a focus, and because a lot of those things were about communities and peoples that were living on less than $1 or $2 a day, and there has been a more recent doubling down on the environmental side of things, though there's always some thread of that as well, because I've been an investor, an advisor, and worked with a number of projects that do renewable energy generation, storage, finance, all that sort of thing, all in the name of having a healthier relationship to the environment. So in a way, it's like not new, but I think it's like, yeah, you know, what inspired it? Well, a lot of it was always there. You just kind of change your proportions as you go along.
Mm-hmm. And
And yeah, go ahead.
and going back really quick on what you were mentioning about I think the wording you said was esteemable um,
Attributes.
attribute. I am from Nicaragua, by the way, so I I've had many people say that I sound very American and that I sound like a native speaker, but I'm not at all. So sometimes I some languages, some words, I'm like, what? I don't know what the hell. So that word,
Mhm.
right? I agree. I couldn't say more than to that, but if and that's probably a attribute. The reason why we don't attribute it correctly are because of all these mental debugs that at one point we're going to touch in the interview. But tell me, what do you think then? If not those attributes, then what do you think are, in your opinion, how we should attributing people with, if that makes sense? Or what is the
I guess
esteemable attribute for you?
I guess maybe more interesting than, you know, just going with what is like currently the popular way to get esteem is when you're around a particular person, how does it make you feel? Like, what is it like to be around that person? Like, let's say you're introducing a speaker and instead of going down the resume list, you said something more like, in the 2 or 3 times I've been able to really sit down with this person, then I've found that they're really present. They really care about people. You know, I felt seen. I felt listened to. And that might be different. Like, you don't need to be that way. Maybe you sit down with the person. It's like, oh, they didn't listen to me at all, but what a visionary,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, you know, so energized by what they were talking about and what they see for the future. It's like, you see, that's not pointing to anything which is like a trophy on the wall. This is just
Mm-hmm.
more about like what it is for to be a human around another human.
Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking right now, how can we go about, and that's how we can take responsibility and start esteeming people this way. And I'm thinking, how can we bring about this to everyone? And obviously, the thing that comes up in my mind is leading by example. But what would be that second thing so that we can all, as a society, collectively start judging ourselves and then identifying with all these trophies, and instead, through um, these more essential attributes that you're talking about? What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's pretty straightforward, which is if you always think about the person as just like this handful of things that they've done, then it means that you're not totally seeing them, right? Because also, like a lot of times these things, well, they have to be at least some point in the past, even if it was the recent past. It's not literally right now. So maybe they achieved something as recently as 2 months ago. But like, who are they right now in front of you? And I think as we kind of like focus people into a handful of things that we find esteemable about their past, then we're also saying that we're not going to be present to them right now. And these people oftentimes end up in a situation where um, they get asked about all the same things, or they're seen as one dimensional, not because they're one dimensional, but because people are always approaching them through the lens of these attributes that are talked about every time.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And of
So,
course, like the person who's being asked things too can shift things, and they can move the subject on to some other things. But yeah, it's easier when everybody's kind of open.
so it's kind of like seeing the verb instead of the noun, which I hope that we get to talk about on the podcast. Um,
Yeah.
but let me change the topic a bit and direct it more on the topic of getting started, right? I one of the reasons why I'm starting this podcast myself is because I'm trying to get started. I'm just quit my job recently, and want to do things by my own. I want to change the world and all this, and I've found that there's so many roadblocks that I just wow, I'm having to navigate. And I think it's cool that you were mentioning about attributes, because one of the reasons why I think that um, myself and so many people are so strangers to trying and failing is because we identify ourselves with our jobs. And we think that, oh, if we fail, quote unquote, then that means that my own self-worth will be less. And that's related to the attributes. We're not just doing that to other people, but we're doing that to ourselves. Um, what do you think is the psychology behind it, and how do you think that we can get rid of these mental blocks of identifying yourself and your failures with your job?
Oh yeah, it's pretty straightforward. So there's this process which is called identity construction. So there's like a way that you put together your identity. And depending on who you are, it'll be different things. So let's say, you're If you're like a ballet dancer, then you have a identity construction around your ability to move. And if you can't move, then you don't have your identity anymore. Do you know what I'm saying? So all of us have some form of identity construction. It'd be like difficult to exist in the world without it. So if you like, get into that space where people are like, oh, destroy all ego and all that sort of thing, part of the reason that they want to do that, maybe the main reason they want to do that, is to remove identity constructions that are not healthy. But identity construction in of itself, and ego in and of itself, is neither healthy nor unhealthy. It's just you need to be able to construct something to exist in the world. The real pain comes from like a permanent connection or attachment to a specific type of identity construction. So, maybe a person is like a great athlete, but then they have a injury, and now they need to like walk with crutches all the time. Well, they could just go into depression for the rest of their lives, or they could look at their identity construction and say, it's time for something different now. Like, I'm obviously not going to race down the field anymore, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason that we identify with our jobs is that we've made it a normal societal thing to use our jobs as identity construction. For me, I have a weird job. Like, I made up my own job, which is lab director for the planet, because I think it's an accurate description of what I do, which is a lab director goes and finds, identifies promising research in the lab, backs the promising research. If there's like scientific or engineering rigor problems, they'll challenge them in order to upgrade the quality of the research. And they deal with some of the administrative and finance aspects of a lab. And that's really kind of what I'm doing. I'm finding these teams around the world. I'm making sure a number of them have funding when they need funding. I'm challenging the rigor and some of the construction of how they're doing what they're doing. So, lab director for the planet. But I'm doing this for teams whose work is very directly related to environmental restoration or societal harmony. So, yeah, if I was like super attached to like job as identity construction, it would be pretty hard to have this job. Because what does this job mean? Like, if you're a lawyer, you can go compare with other lawyers and be like, am I a good lawyer? Right? So that's a good one to have an identity construction around. If even if you're an entrepreneur, which is kind of like a looser kind of job title, then you'll compare and it's like, well, how big is your business and how many people do you employ? And we'll find ways to use that identity construction in order to create esteemable attributes. But if you're some job title that no one's ever heard of before, and I didn't just do it to be fanciful. Like, sometimes people are in HR and they're like, I'm chief happiness officer. And it's like, well, I mean, you work in HR, so it's a little bit fanciful. So I get it. I didn't do mine to be fanciful. I'm trying to be like as descriptive as possible for what I'm doing. So like, yeah, my work is closest to what a lab director does. But like the scope of my lab is not, NIH or this university or whatever. It's like all the environmental and social projects that are happening in the world. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's not that I can get away with zero identity construction at all, but just my connection to it is kind of light. And there's a lot of other roles that I occupy that are not on my LinkedIn because, I don't know, it doesn't matter that much to me. Like, it matters, a good amount to me that I show up and I contribute really quality work and I make a difference in the things that I do. But like, for people to understand me or for people to look at the sweep of things that I've done or am doing and esteem me for it, it's like, you can do it or not. I mean, it's okay with me either way.
Hmm. So I think that, so based on what you mentioned, that I would say then it's about diversifying your identity with several things you find worthwhile.
No, I think it's maybe a little different than that, which is like it's about not being so tied to identity that it hurts you not to be able to go be that. Like, let's say you're just starting out, like you just said, hey, you're kind of in this transition point and you want to go and create your new path, create your new career, and you feel this pressure and you're afraid to start. And I think all of those things come from some sort of external comparative um, energy that you have toward yourself or others. You say, oh, if I start this thing and it sucks, then nah. But it's like, I was in like 12 bands and I released like 20 albums, and you know what? Like nobody thinks about or cares about my music, and that's okay. Like, is it okay to go and really put in effort and care into something because it's just something that you are wanting to do? And can your definition of esteem come from something that's not externally comparative, but more like internally based on character? Like I've been around a lot of folks recently that like talk about how they want to change the world and all these things that they're excited and but without calling anybody out in particular, it's like I find that a lot of people in that sphere of the world are highly unreliable. It's like they don't like actually stick with it and do it. And if you come back, they're saying the same dreamy type thing 6 months later and 12 months later and 18 months later. They don't like just dig in and do it. And I get routed to those people all the time because they're like, yeah, you're a person who's changing the world. You need to talk with this person. They talk like you. And I was like, sure, but like they don't deliver. And I do that not to call them out and say that they're worse, but more because like my internal sense of things, my internal sense of character and being is more like, am I sticking with the things that I'm working on with enough like
Conviction.
right, conviction, internal reliability that I'm putting in what I'm hoping to put in.
Hmm.
Like, you can't control everything that comes out. Maybe somebody, maybe some of the unreliable folks happen into something great. Maybe they do an ICO and, tomorrow they are worth $50 million. Fantastic for you. That's great. But I can control what I put in. And
Hmm.
when I put in a way where I feel like this is honest and real and I'm doing it in a way that is what I can do and challenging myself at the levels I can challenge myself, then maybe that's all that you need. I think like
Hmm.
in a social media world, everybody's comparing themselves to everybody else and everything about everything. It's like, oh, that person has a nice teacup. Oh, this person's going to better restaurants than me. Oh, that person, you know, they have these amazing vacations. Like, look at how much fun they're having. And I'm like, sheesh, so much external, you know, illusory creation of worth.
Yeah. And I think
It's
that's why most people don't follow up because they go for the title. They just want to be, identified as CEO or startup founder or entrepreneur or whatnot. And that's at the end of the day, they don't show up to do the work because they're not as convicted, as you say. It doesn't really come from within. So I guess my next question would be then for if we've identified we're following this path of identifying and ourselves with the wrong things and we want to set ourselves into a path where we want to do work that's more internal, what do you think are the questions that we should be asking ourselves? Because it's not easy. We can be deceived. You know, internally we might think, oh, I want to change the world. I want to be an entrepreneur, which is the usual talk nowadays. Um, but how do we get past our own everything that we've been brainwashed and really find out what kind of problems I really want to solve? What do you think are good questions that we can ask ourselves to go about with this?
I think it's less of a questioning process and more of a reflection process. And it's much more about doing than it is about conceiving. Here's the thing, like when you go and like do a vision board or you're conceiving of a future and all that sort of thing, the person that's conceiving of it is the present you. And the present you is only as far as, is only as developed as you are so far based on your historical experiences. The person that you'll become is different. The person that you'll become is not the person that's making this vision board. And when you try to go reason about what your future is going to be or figure out the right path, then you're probably already missing it. It's way more effective actually to not overthink it. And that doesn't mean like don't care about it at all, but it's like, give it a half day, suss it out, and then really dig into it for a couple months and see what you can do there. And as you do it, you're going to have a lived experience of what it's like to go be that. I think there's a lot of people that want to be CEOs that actually don't have the temperament for it. Just because a CEO is a role of tremendous responsibility. It's a role that requires you to care about a lot more than yourself, and it requires a type of just the willingness to be wrong and grow and to come back over and over and to be strong for other folks and to allow people to lift you up. It's not that flashy a position.
Yeah.
It's and like the real work of being a CEO is not that flashy. It's those conversations where you're pulling two of your key team members together because they've had like a really significant personal conflict. It's the moments where, your strategy is not working and you've got to tear it all apart and try again. It's the unexpected change in the market. It's the occasional existential crisis around like, does your company really do what you hope, create the impact that you wanted it to create in the world, not the one that you just say that it creates in the world. And that's more than half the time of being a CEO. It's also a bunch of meetings and stuff. So,
That already
and that,
kills it.
well, it's not, my point is that it's not the sexy.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that there aren't cool things about it. You have a good level of agency, self-determination. You get to choose the team that's around you for the large part. And actually, if your team sucks, it's probably because you suck. So, yeah. Oh, and actually, that is the thing about being a CEO. Like, if you have started a company and the company is dysfunctional, then really it's typically just an external reflection of conflict that's inside of you.
Hmm.
So one of the main jobs as a CEO is to be able to go face your own inside crap, because you'll run into it in the company where it's like, why do these people not show up to meetings on time? And then you look at yourself and it's like, oh, shoot, I don't show up to all my meetings on time. And it's like, how come these people don't submit their expense reports? Like, I don't have any visibility. And then you look at your own stuff and you're like, shoot. So,
Hmm.
and on and on. Like, if you don't have the appetite to be constantly facing your own crap, then you also should not be a CEO.
Hmm. Now, let's go back to what you were mentioning before of basically finding out what you think is worth doing by doing it versus over strategizing it. Because I think that that's very related to the idea of rapid prototyping. Um, so how
Yeah,
just basically tell us more about that. How tell us more about rapid prototyping and um, using it to get started.
yeah. I mean, it is in a way like a very, very simple idea, which is things work because when you try them, they work. Things don't work because you thought about them hard enough. That's simple enough, isn't it? But I think like what happens with a lot of folks is they like, oh, well, I got to be smart about it. Maybe if I strategize more, maybe if I, get the right guidance, maybe if I, and it's like, great, great, great. Yeah, I'm not saying like don't listen to anybody. Yeah, if there's like some folks you want to talk to, a couple things you want to read to get started, no problem. But the doing is the thing, right? If you're not doing, then basically nothing is happening.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of times people like they buy into systems of thought because they really just want to find a way to never feel, failure or shame. And in practice, it works, right? It works because you never start. You never get into it.
Hmm.
You never get into the zone of even being mediocre. And because here's the thing, like if you actually started it and you ended up being mediocre, then you wouldn't be able to criticize all these folks anymore. So like that illusion of being like, oh, I'm better than them, or if I were to launch a business like this, it would be so much better because, or when I do my business, I'm going to improve it in all these ways. You have to drop all your crap around all that.
Hmm.
Like, and like maybe you try it and another sort of state that you can get into is actually you're not mediocre. You're getting some things done. Like you're not so bad at this. But in the process, you also get real about what the job actually is. And maybe you're not so bad a CEO, but you learn that the job of a CEO includes all the stuff that I just mentioned before. So like the thing you're losing there is like the sexy image of, how awesome it's going to be. So instead of like risking any of that, we just strategize and hypothesize and we hide in our frameworks and intellects and systems and self-help programs and on and on. Because we say to ourselves, well, once we get, perfect enough and once we're ready, we're going to get on there and then we're going to make it happen. But imagine like a 5-year-old kid was like sitting in front of a bicycle, and instead of like actually trying to ride the bicycle, they're like, "Well, I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to talk with people, and they're going to tell me things, and I'll be ready. And as soon as
Hmm.
I jump on that bike, I'm going to ride it perfectly." It's like, no, it's not what it's like. Like, there's actually no amount of material that you can read, no number of people that you can talk to, that when you jump on the bike, that you ride it perfectly the first time. Like, learning to ride a bike is the process of falling down a bunch of times. Learning to walk is the process of falling down a bunch of times. So just our conception of what it means to be successful is kind of screwy. This is maybe part of the reason I had difficulty answering your question around failure, because I don't see it as a special thing. It's just like part of doing anything is basically having a bunch of moments where, oh, I wrote this song, kind of sounds terrible. Or like, I tried out this prototype, just didn't work at all. Um, like that should just be your everyday. It's not like a big event. It's just you're gonna have a bunch of those, and it's even the big ones. Like, how's that different than life? You know?
Hmm. Love it. And that's when it comes with the mindset, right? So how about if walk us through how would that looks with an example? Because say for I know that on your TED talk you mentioned about this example of a community in Mexico going about, and also I know that feedback is a very important aspect, of rapid prototyping. So walk us through an example. It doesn't have to be the Mexico one, could be your favorite one, whatever comes up to your mind of how that looks when it comes to, building a product and when I say product, for anyone listening, I mean anything that you want to create, right? Like a book or a song or a business. And how does that look through an example, basically?
Well, let's just do one that's useful then. What's something that you're trying to do right now?
Mm, um, well, the main project is this podcast. So this podcast.
Great. And what are your like goals or ideas for it?
My the reason why I started this is because I'm going through this phase of getting started, and I'm finding internal and external roadblocks, and I think that I'm not the only one, right? Like if I'm finding them, I'm probably not the only person who has these mental blocks and all these sorts of stuff that are preventing me from getting started. And so the goal is to
But let's concretely getting started on what to do what.
any type of creative endeavor. So in my case, it's even this podcast itself, but for other people, could be anything. Could be a song, it could be a book, it could be a business, a YouTube channel. So the idea
Okay,
is to
so first thing
Mhm.
around innovation is you have to keep it really concrete. So when you say podcast, then fantastic, we're going down the direction of concrete. When you scoot back and you're like, oh, it could be anything, then it becomes non-concrete. And we'll jump into the concreteness more in a second, but a very simple escape strategy for people is to have 10 things that they would love to do and not do any of them. And then say, well, I didn't know which one to do. And my take is really a couple of different strategies here. One is, you can just pick one. If you want to be slightly nerdier, you can try to prioritize which one is most meaningful to you, but you're probably going to be wrong. So it doesn't matter that much. So definitely don't spend a lot of time thinking about how you'll prioritize it all, or how to strategize which is the right one to pick, or which one is most aligned to your life purpose, and da da da. These are all stalling strategies. Like, what is even a way better strategy is, let's say you got 5, 10 things that you want to do. Just block out 2 weeks and then spend 2 days on each one until you get to the end of those 2 weeks. And, for every 2-day sprint, all you're going to do is that one thing and get as far as you can. You say, shoot, I want to do a podcast. Let me book 2 people 2 days in a row, and that's what I'm going to do in my 2-day sprint on this. And then I'm going to pick some theme music on so-and-so morning, and I'm going to work out my intro scripts on so-and-so afternoon, and I'm going to, record all, my first revs of these and da-da-da, and I'll get signed up for all the services on so-and-so afternoon, and just go completely 100% on
Mhm.
it for 2 days. And I say 2 days because it's not even a crazy amount of time. Like, even if you had a full-time job, you could do this on a weekend, right? But do it because you want to have the lived experience of doing it. And maybe what you find out is oh, this is annoying. There's all this post editing on the audio in order to make it tight, and I don't enjoy that. Or maybe you're oh, I loved picking the theme music, but you only really get to do that once. Or I guess if you wanted to do that every single time, then it wouldn't really be a theme. Um, so you'll learn some stuff. Or maybe you'll get into it and it's you know what? I so loved doing those interviews. I could do that every single day of my life. And now you've got the answer you were looking for. But like we try to go and figure out the answer before we get on the bicycle. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you got, 7 things and you block out 2 weeks and you spend 2 days on each one of them. After those 2 weeks are done, you just look back and you say, how was that 2 days of podcasting? Versus how was that 2 days of trying to write a book? Versus how was that 2 days of working with this friend on this startup idea? Versus
Mm-hmm.
how was that 2 days of, and then just be real with yourself. And real means a couple different things. One is like, did that really resonate with me? Did I feel like this is a thing that matters to me to do? And is it growing me in an interesting way? Is it growing me, but is it achievable enough that I'm going to have something real to contribute? Because sometimes people like chase after a thing where it's very growthful, but they're actually not that useful to the endeavor or the business because just didn't build any skills yet. And
Mm-hmm.
other times people go on the opposite side of that spectrum where they feel good about it because it's actually 100% safe and it's not growing them at all.
And
So
that's just to add, sorry, more context to say what I'm going through right now. I'm actually on that phase that you're just describing. At this point I'm sending one podcast invite a day. And what I'm afraid though, I have already 6, 7 interviews being recorded already, but I'm just interested in the feedback because I just haven't putting it out. I haven't put it out there yet, and I'm just afraid that at the end of the day, I'm building and enjoying to build something that is not going to solve any problem for anyone else. And so, bringing it back to what you were saying is, yeah. What do you think? How could I maximize the learning for this? Because I haven't put it out there, and I guess the obvious answer is obviously put it out there, but I guess I'm over strategizing and saying no because I want to launch it, and I don't know. So tell me what you think, basically.
like you should not make it a big deal to launch anything. Like what it should look like is grab the audio from one of your things. If you sometimes podcasts are very loose and they don't get edited at all. If you're the sort of podcast where you do edit, just set a little timer for yourself. Give yourself 3 hours to go edit the audio of the podcast. And at the end of 3 hours, whatever it is what it is. And then text a link to your friend to go listen to it. Or listen to the first 5 minutes and have them text you back or call you back and say like, what the experience was like for them. Like now you're getting into it, right? And of course you'll text a friend, which is kind of like the listener that you had in mind when you were making the podcast. But you'll get some feedback from them. You'll make some different edits. And then the next time you'll text 3 friends and you'll see what happens there. But it doesn't become real unless you like set a time that it's going to happen and you set concretely what it is. Concrete, basically specificity is the friend of innovation. If you say, okay, I'm going to set aside these 3 hours to edit my 20-minute podcast, down from the 35-minute interview that was there. And at the end of 3 hours, I'm going to text it to 3 friends. That is the mission, go.
Mm.
You'll get it done. It's not magic. Really, everybody who's ever done anything impactful, all they did was stuff like what we're talking about right here. How did the Beatles do what they did? Well, they played a bunch of shows. They practiced their instruments. They argued with each other. They they sat there struggling with lyrics. It's just the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And did they have any guarantee that like their songs would change the world? Nope. And you need to be fine with the guarantee that it may not change the world. Like I said, internal and external reference points are not just about self-comparison, where it's like this person has better breakfast than me on Instagram. It's also about your own comparison to your your vision. And I'm just going to be totally straightforward about this, which is you don't get to control how much people will love or not love your work. You do get to control the integrity of how reliably you're going to show up for your work. You do get to control the integrity of, how growthful is your work and how much do you challenge yourself in your work. But the other stuff you don't get, you know. And I'm still a musician. I was a musician for a long time, and definitely when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, like the bands I was in, there would always be talk about like, oh, are we going to make it? And like, who's going to sign us? And different members of my bands have been signed, and different friends that I had that we like play shows with have been signed, and it's great. And then there's other folks who were just as talented musicians and pushed just as hard every day, and they didn't get signed, and they didn't get, a record advance, and they didn't get any of those things. And I realized that, you know what, you can't guarantee whether you're going to have a platinum record hit, but you can guarantee yourself a life in music if you want. Because even though those people had another job, waiting tables or working in an office or what have you, they would still clock in and write music for 10 hours a week. And they would still go and play those coffee house shows, and they would still go and open for a band from time to time. And that is their life in music.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how much you can guarantee. And the difference between those people and some of the people that are playing for 100,000 people in a huge stadium, actually skill-wise, a lot of times there's none. Or actually sometimes the coffee house person is more skilled. But you can't totally control, exactly how your life in music will be, but you can guarantee yourself a life in music.
Mm-hmm. And
So are
right.
people okay with that? That's the main question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. It's funny that you mention all this because I think I think it's about, are you willing to sacrifice other things as well? Say, for example, I was having a dinner with a friend yesterday, and I was mentioning to her that I don't have time for a social life anymore. Like I just I'm always working. And while I was saying that to her, I was realizing that I'm honestly, like I'm so okay with it. Like I don't, like there's a need obviously for me to socialize and connect more. But I'm in a stage right now where I just feel like I just want to work. And
Mhm.
I realize that it is a sacrifice because I do want it. I do wish that I could spend more time with friends or people in general. But at the same time, like I want this other thing, and if I don't sacrifice basically one thing for the other, I'm not going to be able to do this other thing. And it was a nice moment to realize, like I'm willing to sacrifice this at this stage in my life. I'm willing to sacrifice um, social life and other things for this work that I want to do. Um, so I think that that kind of
And
like builds up on the idea that you were mentioning.
and like in a way it's not actually a sacrifice. I mean, I guess the other thing that our society does is it basically says more is better. If you have, you know, who even wants work-life balance? Have everything, have it all, everything about everything. And uh, you really can't, kind of can't. And it doesn't mean that the other stuff is a sacrifice, right? There'll be points and periods in your life where you're dedicated to creative endeavors, and there'll be points and periods in your life when you're dedicated to, holding down the job that keeps your family going. And there'll be points in your life that you're dedicated to, a vision or a dream that has mattered to you. And it's none of it's well, none of it needs to be a sacrifice. I guess like the conception of sacrifice comes from the idea that your life, there's like this possible life where literally everything is firing at a 10 out of 10. And I guess just our lived experience is not like that. Like, I'm not sure, well, I guess I have some inclination, inklings as to why we ended up the way that we did on this, but I will still say I'm not sure how we decided to be so dissatisfied with a life that doesn't have a 10 out of 10 on everything.
Hmm. Makes sense.
Because that's a really dangerous attitude, right? Like, let's say your life is a 10 out of 10 on two areas, and it's a 3 out of 10 on a couple areas, and it's a 7 out of 10 on a couple more areas. Well, you could just be like, you know what, that's my life right now, and I'm really rocking it on these two things. It's awesome. Or you could look at that and it's like, what's wrong with my 3 out of 10s? You know, why am I not good enough? Like, how come I can't have all of those things? And I guess people maybe aren't reflecting on the fact that that's a chosen attitude. Like,
Hmm.
that's not based on anything real. Like, there's people that'll look at the two things that you're doing that are 10 out of 10 and admire you and be like, oh, you're just really doing a great job, and it inspires me to go see. And then you're kicking yourself internally. And it's like, but I still have this 3 out of 10. How do I make it all 10? And like, truthfully, it just doesn't roll like that. And do you want to like stress yourself out about that? It doesn't mean that like, at some other point you can't shift that 3 out of 10 to a 10, but it might be a different configuration. The things that you had been a 10 out of 10 on, you just do a bit less of. And this can be seen through a frame of sacrifice. They can see seen through a frame of not being good enough and how come you can't get to a 10 out of 10 on everything. Or it can just be understood that different outcomes in life requires different forms of living. Like a seed has a particular usefulness and shape, and a sprout has a particular usefulness and shape, and a flowering plant has a particular usefulness and shape, and even a decaying plant has a usefulness and shape. Like, we we don't really serve ourselves by trying to idealize a form.
Hmm. That could be a new mental debug if it hasn't, if it's not already one.
Yeah, probably should write it down.
Mm. So let me change because we're cut, by the way. We're around the 1 hour mark. Are you good with making maybe 10, 15 more minutes?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just sitting here with my cat.
I see. Nice. So let me just go over, let me see really quick, a list of questions that I had. Mm. Do you see me, is my screen frozen on your end?
Oh yeah, it's totally frozen.
Okay, whatever at this point. As long as you're not frozen, I'm good. All right, so boom, going back to it. All right, so aside everything that we've spoken of in the past hour, what advice would you give to, a smart-driven creative about entering the real world outside of theorizing and in college and planning and all this? What would you tell them? Or what advice, if not what advice would you give them to ignore?
Hmm. Well, I'll give some advice to follow first. If you're like an entrepreneur, then do not delay the process of trying to sell something. Just try right away. And not because money is the only important thing, or you need to go figure out how to wheel and deal your way. It's because if somebody decides to buy something, it's because they're doing it because it's useful enough to them that they want to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want the clarity of whether you're doing something useful or not, try to sell it.
Mm.
Try and like not sell it like pitch it to people. Sell it like, oh, I took money out of my wallet and gave it to you, right? Took out my credit card and ordered this thing online. That's what it means to sell it. Stop conceptualizing it. Stop thinking about, version 1 launch, version 2 launch. Stop thinking about like how you'll position it in the marketplace and all your brand characteristics and all this stuff. Like I tell people to like boil it down to what is the thing that you could say in 100 words and then have the order button under it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and if people are buying it, then you're probably working on something that is actually going to be helpful to people. Then it's just about delivering it. But I find a lot of people, are kind of entrepreneurs, but they never get around to selling anything. They just like the playing around with product development. And I'm just going to say, you're not a bad person for that, but it's just a waste of your time and your entrepreneurial ambition to be spinning your wheels like that. You sell it not because you're greedy and you need to make money every second. You sell it because you want to find out if the thing that you're trying to do is of any real service.
Nice.
I think if you don't want to be an entrepreneur, well, first off, I want to say it's actually fine if you don't want to be an entrepreneur. Like what I said about being a CEO, it's not for everybody. And it's not shameful to not be doing the most popular thing at any given moment. If you're not going to be an entrepreneur, then find a place where you can go contribute, like a team, an effort where you can go contribute, where you are compensated for your work, because sometimes people also go on like these dreamy wild goose chases where they don't get compensated for work that they do. But find a place where you are compensated for your work, and that as you work, you get a little bit of challenge and growth. And the metaphor I like to use is like a rock climber. You want to have 3 limbs firmly planted and 1 reaching all the time. And what that means to me is like 75% of what you do should be like well grounded in skills that you have, and you're clearly contributing through those skills at work. And then 25% of stuff that you do is challenging you in some way, like having you reach so that you're learning. Or it's like, oh, I've never had to go and, work out a balance sheet before. Well, that's a new thing that I can grow into. I've never had to go lead a customer discussion before. That's a new thing I can grow into. I've never been involved in a marketing effort before. That's a new thing to grow into. But that's the one limb that's reaching. And every once in a while, you'll have moments in your career where you only have 2 limbs planted and you got to swing your legs over onto a ledge, or you need to, jump onto to go grab something. So you only 2 limbs are planted. Those are riskier moments. You'll have to take them every once in a while. Don't make that your pattern. And also don't make your pattern the situation where all 4 limbs are securely planted, because then you're going nowhere. I mean, like, you know how to do everything that's in your job, but you're not going anywhere from there. But you don't need to be like a swashbuckling entrepreneur. You don't need to be a visionary, anything. It's like, if that's in you, then go for it. If it's in you enough that it's an area that you want to grow into, then go for it. And when I mean go for it, I mean it's like actually just do it today, and then do it the next day, and then after a week of doing it, reflect on, how's that going? Is like this a thing that I actually want to keep going with or not? And we can all tell, right? Like we can tell when something fires you up enough that you're going to stick with it. I remember when I started writing music at like age 9 or 10, I'd taken piano lessons since I was 5. I didn't try to write anything up until I was like 10, let's say. And I was not good at writing music, but like I was like very interested in trying to get better at writing music. So we can tell that about ourselves even after a week of doing it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
It's like I think we try to confuse ourselves by like making it into some deep existential thing all the time, where it's like, oh, I know I want to be an entrepreneur, but like, I just can't stay with it at all. And it's like, or you don't want to be an entrepreneur
Yeah,
because like the people that actually become entrepreneurs are the ones that stay with it even when they suck at it.
yeah, nice. And what advice would you give them to ignore?
Well, I mean, some of it I was just talking about. It's like just because people tell you that this is the frame of what success looks like today, you don't need to agree with them. Actually, you don't even necessarily need to listen to them. Like, if you've seen how many ways that people have been successful in the past, and I mean like all throughout history, then you'll realize that a lot of what people talk about today is fashion. And sometimes like the fashion of the day is also the fashion that suits you really well. But for a lot of people, a lot of times it doesn't. So yeah, don't get stuck on that. It's like, is the only way to go change the world to be some like swashbuckling entrepreneur? Not necessarily. Like, there's like medical researchers that figured out like vaccines, which has saved millions of lives. And they were not swashbuckling entrepreneurs. They're just good medical researchers. And there are people that, you know, like Georgia O'Keeffe, like mostly spent time alone in the desert and painted. That doesn't look like any kind of entrepreneur you've seen before, but she absolutely was a profound model of success. So that's what I would look for. It's like be expansive in the way that you shop for your model of success. Like if there's lives that have captivated you from the past, just take that. I mean, like it's a little bit of tongue in cheek, but it's also not completely untrue. It's like I like to think of the way that I approach things is like I want to be like the intersection of Buckminster Fuller and Prince. And I was like, okay, cool, because I like get I like kind of vibe with the way that they thought about being successful in the world. And Buckminster Fuller never made a lot of money, right? He just invented stuff and he wanted to do good by for humanity. And like Prince didn't max out his commercial success. He was always like, I'm an artist and I got to stay true to what's in me. And sometimes it's like a hit and sometimes people aren't digging it and that's okay. So like go and find, and you know what? Neither of those people are on like the tip of people's tongues right now. They're not like the big famous people that everybody points to right now as like what it means to be successful. And I don't care. Like, it's those people like resonate with my sensibility, like scientific rigor with a deep care for humanity, you know, artistic energy, creative energy, and being willing to be different. It's like, yeah. So get a little bit conscious about who you are building your sensibility of success from. Is it Kim Kardashian because that's just what everybody's looking at? Is it Elon Musk because that's what everybody's looking at? I think the majority of people in the world do not want to be like Elon Musk,
Yeah,
actually.
hell no, 100%.
So, but like that's just a model for success right now.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you know what? There are people in the world that is the right model of success for them. It's like fantastic, but it's probably 0.1% of people, and not even just because of like skill level or something like that. I'm saying independent of skill, like personality wise, intention wise, lifestyle wise, there's very few people who like match the kind of spirit of Elon Musk for the good and the bad. And like, why don't we just be real about that,
Yeah.
right? Like, you'll meet a person and it's like, oh, you're actually too compassionate to be Elon Musk. Because, I don't know, like one of his friends said to me, it's like, the thing about Elon is that he loves humanity, but he hates people. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And like, so look, there's some people that's like exactly the right mold. Like, awesome. Like, that's exactly how you are. And then there's a lot of people where it's like, that's not your mold. So why would you make that your model of success then? That's crazy town. It doesn't mean that you can't be inspired by elements of what, that person is doing or any person is doing. It's great. But like, we should challenge what we think success is. We need to go define it for ourselves.
Mm.
And if people look at what I'm doing and they're like, lab director of the planet, that's not even a real job. It's like, okay, oh, you write all this music, you do all this artwork, nobody likes it. And it's like, yep, probably so. That's right. And honestly, like, just actually be okay with it.
Mm. Um, Question then. Do you consider yourself successful and why?
I think probably more successful than at any other time in my career. And like, oddly enough, like, not because I have the most estimable attributes. I think people have a lot more trouble trying to go figure out what the heck I'm doing now than, executive at this tech firm or inventor of so and so or all the other, little flavors of esteem and snapshots of esteem from the past. But like, I think I'm more successful now at working on the things that are important to me as like the main thing that I do than I have been before in the past. And will all those things gel and make a huge difference in the world? Like I said, you can't know. Is the next song you write going to be a hit? You can't know. Will any of your songs ever be a hit? You can't know. Like, is this podcast going to take off? You can't know. But it's like, are you in it because, you know, it's really something that connects with you? Are you going to bring it at a level of like integrity and character and persistence and keep yourself open to growth? If you're doing all that stuff, then it's fine. And also just let yourself relax sometimes. Everybody is like so stressed about everything all the time. Like nothing is ever good enough. And I don't know what that does for us. Like, why would you do that? Especially to yourself, you know? It's like, imagine like you got married and the only thought you ever had is like, my spouse is not good enough yet. That'd be a shitty marriage. And like, realize that most people treat themselves like that. That's terrible. Like, why are you going to be so bad to that person? Which, of course, is you.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, we're like doing that all the time. It's like societally accepted. You got like Gary Vaynerchuk or whatever. It's like, if your eyeballs aren't bleeding, you aren't working 27 hours a day. And it's like, okay, dude. Like, yeah, there's also a thing called like it's enough.
Yeah.
And like what I've done is beautiful today.
Mm.
And like I'm coming back tomorrow. I'm going to win this race because I won't stop. Not because it's like I killed myself for 20 hours today. I think that's actually the rarest thing. The rarest thing is the persistence. You know, I asked a group of people that were talking about all this dreamy stuff the other day because it's like, oh, we're gonna reboot society and we're gonna reinvent money and we're gonna do, and it's like, cool, man. That's like in line with some things that I've thought about and worked on. So let's talk about it. But like we kind of got to the point in the conversation where I was like, how much are you guys in this? Are you in this because like blockchain is like an exciting topic right now and some people that you know made money off of cryptocurrencies? Is that why you're in it? Or is this a thing that you will care about and be pushing on and like, you know, will be deeply important to you 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Because I'm going to tell you who's going to actually be involved in changing the world is the people that are going to put in that time. It doesn't mean that there won't be some people that like are in it for a much shorter time who make a bunch of money. It's great. But there's a lot of people that made a lot of money that are completely inconsequential. So define what you want. If it's the money, then yeah, maybe take this ride because there's lots of money floating around that space right now. But if it's like the stuff you're actually saying, the deep societal change, like the re-examination of our values and the way that we construct an economy and our relationship to money, then yeah, be prepared to stay in it. And also let me see you live it. Like what are your changes in daily behavior with your money that like shows me like this new level of character? Or is it at least an experiment trying to go do that, you know? I don't really see that. I see people buying islands and doing stuff which is just a ridiculous caricature of the old way that money has been abused. And yeah, it just doesn't strike me as they're really in it.
Hmm. Not even authentic to themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's a story that serves them right now and justifies the money that they've made. But like, I think that's all it is. And you think that people can't tell? I mean, we can tell and you can tell. And who cares what people think of you, but it's like, at least within yourself, you can tell that what you're saying is not really in your heart. So, what kind of life are you trying to live?
Beautiful.
I'm not saying there won't be moments where you have to go, you know, where you're figuring it out, or there won't be moments where it's kind of, you know, you're like in an illusion for a bit. It's fine. But that day when you recognize that the thing that you're saying is just an illusion, like how much courage are you going to have? Are you going to like actually challenge yourself to step out of it? Are you going to be like, well, it's pretty comfortable and I made a lot of money in it, and if I keep telling this story, then people will keep believing me, and if I keep believing me, then I can do this illusion another, you know, one more year. I think that's what people are in. That's why, you know, there's so much malaise, ennui, you know, depression, anxiety, stress, all the things. Because people are denying the stuff which is pretty basic. And they have stories and constructions and frameworks and all these things that that replace just like the lived sensibility of what's true.
Hmm.
Like for real, I was in Indonesia and I spoke at this oceans conference, and by my calculations, like we are probably in our best case scenario going to wipe out 90% of all the corals. In a realistic scenario, we're going to wipe out 99%. And I'm a person who's like actively working in this area and like wanting us to, you know, keep and restore as much as we can. But like, I'm not going to get in front of an audience and tell them a story. It's like what's really happening is what's really happening. And it doesn't mean that I'm not going to try to push to have it be one of the better outcomes. But we also need to just be like real and present. And we also need to be willing to fight a battle that we lose. Like it might be that I spend a significant proportion of my time and energy and life, years at least of it, trying to go do something about corals, and then still, by the time I die, they've all been wiped out. It's like, are you willing to go fight for things even if there's like a real chance, and maybe the most likely chance that you'll lose? Or are you fighting for things just because of the image of being a winner? Or like clinging to being able to go project that image of being a winner? Like if a thing was actually, the most likely outcome was that you were going to lose, would you still stay in it? And there's things like that. And they force you to ask much harder questions about who you are. Because if money was my thing, I can make money in a lot of ways. If like being seen as like some environmental martyr, was my thing, I could like go pick issues that we'd make fast progress on, but may like be less important, in terms of the overall health of the ecosystem. But like my thing is about like rigor and truth and determination. And like if you're scientifically rigorous, you're going to see, the death of the ocean ecosystems is one of the biggest things that's happening in the planet in a very short amount of time. And if you're realistic, you see that actually we're on a trajectory to largely lose this game. But if you're determined, you don't give up anyhow.
I love that, man. I really, really like that. Are you willing to go for something even if you might lose? I have never thought of it that way. I really like that.
Yeah,
Nice, man.
I think,
So,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, if you ask that question, then you get yourself out of the Instagram version of it because you're not constantly imagining, oh, well, once this is so successful and once everybody's applauding me for it, you're like living with the realistic, honest possibility that it doesn't happen or that doesn't work or that you don't make it. And then you just have to be real. It's like, does this matter enough to me that I'll stay with it anyway?
Let me just be, I just thought of something, and let me be the devil's advocate. Is this, could it be that this is just another way to identify yourself with something, you know,
Remember
kind
I
of,
said that there's it's not that you shouldn't have any identity construction. You should just ask yourself what your identity construction is about.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it goes back again to what you want, basically.
I think that's a really interesting choice of words because when I'm saying what is your identity construction about, then one of the most central questions to that is why exactly do you want what you want? Do you want it because you're not enough and if you got this, people would see you as enough? Or you think that they would? Do you want it because everybody told you that this is what people are supposed to want right now? Or do you want it because you wouldn't be able to be with yourself if you didn't at least give it a shot? Like when I was born, it's like, around 40 years ago, we had close to 100% of coral reefs on Earth. Circa today, we lost, around 50%. And by the time I die, it'll probably be down to 0%. And I think, like, what if a person 200 years from now looks back on this era and they're like, man, between the years 1980 and 2050, like, we had all these coral reefs and they all disappeared, and, half the species in the ocean disappeared. Who was alive then? Didn't anybody care? Didn't anybody pay attention in that whole 70, 80 years? You know, like, weren't there any smart people who cared enough to at least try? What happened? And I realized that, like, I'm the person who's alive right now. Like, I'm the person that that future person would be asking that question about. Like, how were you a smart person that, like, was capable and allegedly cared, and you didn't try?
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And that's not me trying to prove myself to anybody. I don't owe anything to this person 200 years from now. But when I, like, think that thought process, I'm like, holy shit. This is why we gotta at least give it a shot.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to be the lab director of the planet. I want to, like, try to go and figure out how these things can be regular jobs, so a lot of other people can, to this extent that this is a thing that really matters to them, but a lot of other people can jump in there and also make this part of how, their contribution, and also, like, how they make their living. I'm very practical about things. It's like, if you can't make a living, you don't stay in a thing for very long. So I don't want to be the lab director of the planet to be special. I, like, want to try to define what this job looks like so we can have 1,000 of them.
Mm.
We probably need more than that, but uh, you get it though. It's
Yeah, nice. I love it. I love it. Hmm. So Tom, it's 1 hour and 30 minutes, and I know that we said 1 hour. Um,
Yeah,
so, but no, man, I'm so glad to have had this interview with you. I love it. I love seeing you, even in maybe you're not seeing yourself, but it's like I could even see you think, like I can see your thought processes. It was awesome. I really, really enjoyed it, and no, it was awesome, really. So thank you so
yeah,
much.
yeah. Thank you for the invitation, and, best of luck putting the podcast together. It's just, yeah, just stay with, and, even if it's not the podcast, just stay with whatever it is inside of you that made you want to go communicate and contribute in this way.
100%. Thank you so much, man. And off already out of the interview, you remind I won't I'm not gonna jinx it and say anything that's gonna give you any preconception, but do you know about the work from Derek Sivers?
I don't think I do.
Man, it's just I'll just send you the link if you click it, you might be interested or not. I'm not gonna say anything. I just when it comes to thought patterns and mental models, it just reminds me a lot of him, and he was a music producer. So you
Hmm.
kind of like share that you have that shared experience with him. So I'll just send you the links without saying more.
Yeah, I can dig it. I like to learn.
And yeah, man, so just for you to know, like I'm still compiling and editing and all that stuff, and then I'm going, I'll have like I'm a dancer actually, and have a dance thing and several other things going
That's
up in
cool.
2 weeks. So I will be putting the podcast on hold for at least 2 to 3 weeks, meaning that I will probably release this in June or something. So just for you to know, and I'll let you know, and I'm creating snippets and all this um, when I launch it. So I'll just let you know when I do. And What else? What else? What else? What else? No, I think that's it. I think that's it.
Yeah, that's great. Looking
What?
forward to it.
Just a quick question, man. Like, what do you think? Is there anything, any feedback that you have either on the interview or on the idea? Aside what you just said and mentioned, which yes, I resonate and I agree with it. Anything else you would tell me?
Yeah, I think like there's something around the development of like perspective and voice, and you know, you'll like get more of it as you do more of it. But like podcasts, or really almost anything gets listened to because they're just like a way that people approach a thing. So like maybe this interviewer is just, so like one interviewer might just be very detail orientated and they really get in there and they get into the details and they suss out the mechanics of what was happening in a thing. And that's the reason that people listen to them. And then another interviewer is kind of like breezy and light and they make everybody feel comfortable and then interesting stuff comes out as their guests interact with each other because they're all so comfortable. And another one, you know, is like following a particular beat, like, oh, here's the future of technology and medicine, and that's the reason that people listen to them. But I think like as you sort this out, and I think you're doing the right thing. You're doing a bunch of interviews, so I think as you do your interviews, you'll listen back, and some of them will be like, yeah, there's something there, like the perspective that I took or this type of person that I'm interviewing, or, you know, like this way of interacting. Because there's like a cadence too. Some things are kind of like back and forth really fast. Everybody speaks for like 5 seconds at the most, and other things are like a little bit more expository and like self-developing. And you'll get a feel for it. I think like music is a great analogy because people like and listen to different styles of music because of that kind of feel. And I just say that you're in the process of developing what that feel is for you. And there's no better way to do it than like doing 6 or 7 of these. And you might end up trashing 5 out of 7
Oh shit, hello?
with that different feel, right? So, hey, yep,
Oh, yeah,
I'm
there you
there.
go. Oh, okay, that's good. I just
There.
hello. Oh, okay, that's good. I just it blocked off for a moment.
Well, all I was saying is that as you do more of these interviews, then there'll be like a feel to them, like the timing, the pacing, the types of things that are asked, like the general vibe of things. Do you take like a very realistic tone, a pessimistic tone, an inquisitive tone, and you know, like a effortlessly optimistic tone? Like, and then all that. There's nothing's better or worse, right? Sometimes like people are like pessimistic or wry, and that's like their style. And other times people are like straight shooting and informational, and that's their style. And other times people are like optimistic and hopeful and imaginative, and that's their style. So you're gonna like lock into your style and your pace, and I think that's just as much of what a podcast is about as like the subject matter or you know how you edit it. It's that feel. So you'll get that feel, which is like the combination of what you like to do and what is like confers the right thing when you listen to it.
Hmm.
And all I was saying is that you might do 7 of these interviews to start out, and only 2 of them have that feel, and you just toss 5 of them away. It's great. Or maybe you go back to those folks and be like, "Hey, develop the format a little bit more. Would you be open to doing it in like this tighter way?"
Hmm.
And then you got your thing, man.
Nice.
But yeah, don't overthink it either. It's like it's just like when you hear a piece of music, you don't need to sit and think about it for 100 years to figure out whether you like it or not. Like, and it's true when you listen to podcasts too, right? Like when you listen to the first 5 minutes of podcasts, you can tell like, oh yeah, I can sit with this. This is good. Versus like, nah, this is kind of dragging out. Don't like this. Or, oh, or like these people are like a morning show. They're just like hollering at each other and making stupid jokes. That's not my thing. For some people, it's their thing too, and not trying to like make any permanent like decisions for anybody as to what they should like. But like you'll know like what your style is based on listening to a couple minutes and being like, yeah, this is the stuff.
Hmm. Got it. Cool, man. Thank you so much again,
Cool.
bro. Like I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. You gotta thank the cat.
Yeah, and what happened? It's like off.
Oh yeah, she can tell when I'm getting up, so she just hopped off.
No, but the lights turned off all of a sudden. Like it went completely dark.
No, the sun went down.
Oh, but it's oh right, because it's I for some reason I thought that you were like in the morning or something, but I just completely realized it's nighttime for you. But okay, man. All right,
Yeah.
Tom. Thank you so much again. Okay, I'll
Yep.
I'll send you the interview once I publish it and all that.
All right. Have a good day, man.
All right, same man. Take care. Bye
Okay,
bye.
best of luck.